The problem is the populism in the West, it succeeds when the center can't solve the problems. And I always say to people, populism doesn't invent grievances. By and large, it doesn't invent them. It exploits them.
Hello and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast. This is where you'll find extended interviews with the newsmakers I talk to every week on my public television show. I'm Ian Bremmer. Winston Churchill once said, "To improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often." Little did he know how much change would come to his nation or how quickly, because in the span of just 48 hours in early September, the United Kingdom got a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and then a new monarch, King Charles III. Both are facing big challenges in their new roles. For Truss, the Tory leader, it's a range of issues from inflation to the ongoing fallout of Brexit. And for Charles, it's the relevance of the monarchy itself, now that its longest-serving and much-beloved ruler is gone. I'm talking about all that and more with a man who occupied 10 Downing Street for more than a decade, former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Let's get to it.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company, places clients' needs first by providing responsive, relevant, and customized solutions. Visit firstrepublic.com to learn more. In a world upended by disruptive international events, how can we rebuild? On Season 2 of Global Reboot, a foreign policy podcast in partnership with the Doha Forum, FP Editor-in-Chief Ravi Agrawal engages with world leaders and policy experts to look at old problems in new ways and identify solutions to our world's greatest challenges. Listen to Season 2 of Global Reboot, wherever you get your podcasts.
Prime Minister Tony Blair, welcome to GZERO World.
Thank you, Ian.
So much to talk to you about right now. We're both here in New York. We're talking to a lot of global leaders. But I have to at least start, given the events of the past weeks in your country. And, you know, after 70 years of Queen Elizabeth, and you've knew her so well, tell us something personal, interesting about your relationship with her.
Well, you know, I grew up with the Queen. And when I first met her as Prime Minister, she said to me, "You're my 10th Prime Minister. The first one was Winston Churchill. That was before you were born." So, you know, I realized you were always talking with someone who's this vast historical experience. She was very gracious and actually kind, very empathetic towards her prime ministers. She knew the burden of responsibility you carried, and she was conscious of that and always helpful. I couldn't really tell you what her politics were. She was always above, the politics, but she had this intense commitment to duty. I mean, it really was her driving force, and that those characteristics of sort of dignity, duty, decency, they defined her, and I think they gave her this power. This power of example, if you like, and she was just such a constant feature of British life through all the changes. I mean, if you go back to the 1950s, look at 1950s Britain, just go and watch the films of the coronation and just see the faces. Then you go fast forward to Britain 2022 and the huge difference in social makeup, in class, in society, in the way we live, work, think, everything, and she managed to guide the monarchy through all of that. So she was a remarkable person. We used to meet every week, obviously when I was Prime Minister. And then I was actually with her about 3 months ago. We had lunch together when she bestowed this honor on me called the Knight of the Garter.
I remember that. You have to dress up for that, really.
Well, it was instigated in 1340, and
it seems like the outfits haven't changed very much.
No, that's right. So you have to, if you want to see a really ridiculous picture of me, you can Google it and see that. But she was ungrateful. She was very reflective, and she had it seems an odd thing to say about a monarch, but she was actually very streetwise. She kept her pulse firmly on where the British people were.
In 2022, for some, the monarchy feels like an anachronism. It is very different from the 50s in lots of ways. I mean, the Labour Party in Australia today is a Republican party. Do you feel like there have to be changes in the monarchy?
Well, I think King Charles will instigate certain changes. I think probably, or so I read. I mean, I don't know, but look, in the end, my generation, which was, as it were, the first generation that grew up in a society really doesn't have the same deference, didn't have the same attachment to class as traditional British society. We've come to our own settlement in our own minds of this issue, if you like, which is, you can have an elected president or you can have a monarch, and we prefer that, the tradition of the monarch, someone who's above politics. It gives you a certain point of unity as a country, even if your politics is quite divided, which ours has been, like yours in the past few years. And so, we've come to not a kind of not an historical or a traditional decision to keep the monarchy. We've come to what is a rational decision that we prefer it to the alternative system. And so I think provided, and I'm sure this will happen with King Charles, by the way, because he's a decent and caring guy. I think if the monarchy keeps to this principle of duty to the country first, service to the country first, I think it's reasonably well, supported in British society. As
a unifying factor.
Yeah, as a unifying factor. And, Western politics is pretty ugly, and has been for several years. But, with the Queen's passing, I mean, even people I knew who were Republicans were moved by it and respected her and supported her. And I think, Prince Charles, as he was then, was, for example, on issues like the environment, on better relationships between the faiths, was well ahead of his time. The royal family, because of the Commonwealth and the number of African countries within the Commonwealth, they were very, very, it's very ingrained in the monarchy, this head of the Commonwealth, the concept of that. So look, who knows, but I think for the moment, I would say the monarchy is pretty safe.
So we also have a new prime minister. It's been a busy couple of weeks for the United Kingdom. She comes into power not only with the transition of your monarch, but also with massive challenges on her plate. I mean, just the scandals every day under Boris Johnson, difficulty in terms of preparing for the inflation, particularly on the energy side that we presently see, the continued knock-on effects of Brexit, which she initially voted against, but now is a flag carrier for. I know that she's not of your party, but you want her to succeed, of course. I mean, how do you think she is? It's almost too early to say how she's doing, but how do you feel about her priorities as she's so far addressed them?
I mean, you've got short-term challenge, which is the energy price rise, because this is huge, and then you've got a longer-term challenge. On the short-term challenge, the rise in energy costs, it's just important to understand what this means in Britain and across Europe. I mean, household bills will literally treble, right? You're going to be talking about thousands of pounds more that people will be forced to pay. So the government's going to have to intervene because, frankly, a large part of the population literally won't be able to pay it. And also, if you try and force them to pay it, you'll have a massive negative impact on the economy. Okay. So you've got a short-term issue where government's going to have to subsidize, effectively, energy costs through this winter.
And the announcement that she's made on that front, the £100 billion plus, was that the right approach?
Well, I mean, my institute put out a paper that was more targeted and with what would have been an incentive to use less energy. I think the problem with just a blanket subsidy, I understand the reasons for it this winter, but if this carries on, the problem over time is that you're not giving people an incentive to reduce their energy bills by reducing energy demand. Okay, so, but whatever way you want to cut this particular cake, it's going to cost a lot of money. Okay, so that's the short term. The long term question that she's identified is the right question, which is around growth. And because, when I was Prime Minister, we had growth rates, well above 2% was the trend rate of growth. We've been growing well under 2%. And, you've got to get the growth rates up, because if you don't, one of the first things you realize in government is if growth's strong, revenues are strong. If revenues are strong, you can spend money on public services. If the growth rates are low or you're in recession, then suddenly everything looks worse and you're having to cut back on services. So she's right to target growth. Now she's going for a particular way to do that, which is a lot of tax cuts and so on. Personally, I think the big questions around growth long-term for Britain are around the technology revolution, infrastructure and education. So whatever she's doing on tax cuts and so on, for me, the big three things are really those, and it's too early to say whether she has plans for those or not.
You met with Ursula von der Leyen, among others, recently. How is the UK perceived today by the European Union? And I'm not just talking about its leadership, but generally speaking, how is it changing over the last few years since the Brexit referendum?
Well, I think there's a lot of frustration in Europe, in the sense that the European Union didn't want Britain to leave, right? And people like Ursula von der Leyen are very Anglophile in their outlook, close links with the UK. And so they want to have a good relationship with Britain going forward. Now we've got to resolve this Northern Ireland Protocol, which is a Brexit hangover, because if you take the United Kingdom as a whole, which means Britain, the island of Britain, and then Northern Ireland, if you take all of it out of the single market of the European Union, the external border of Europe becomes the border between North and South in Ireland. And therefore, in theory, you should put border controls along that border.
But that's deeply unpopular, right, and dysfunctional.
Exactly, and conflicts with the Good Friday Agreement, a part of which was to keep the border open. Right. Okay, so it's a problem which I think we could resolve practically, and my institute again suggested ways we can do that. We need to sort that out, and then we need to look for how we build a more constructive relationship with our own continent. And I think there's a willingness on the European side to do that. And the only question is whether the very kind of anti-European politics of a part of the right in Britain get in the way of that. And it would be tragic if it did, because as I say to people, you can change the political and legal relationship that Britain has with Europe. What you can't do is change our geography. You get from London to Paris quicker by train than you get from London to Scotland.
Now, I am quite familiar as an American with playing politics with the border. And I want to ask you, given what you've seen of the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, and given what you've seen of her cabinet, do you think that they will be able to avoid playing politics with the Ireland border? Or do you see this as kind of a train that is heading to wreck?
I think and hope that they're sensible enough to just settle the Northern Ireland Protocol issue and move on. I think they will. I hope they will. I mean, we'll see. But if you want a solution to it, there is a practical solution. If it becomes an ideological fight, with Britain effectively saying Europe's got to drop its single market rules and so on to suit us, then the thing won't work. But I feel there are some indications that the new Prime Minister will try and take a pragmatic view.
Now, you say that the Europeans, of course, didn't want the UK to leave the European Union. Of course, it's also true that a lot of Britons didn't want the UK to leave. You were one of them.
Me, absolutely.
The Scots, of course, a large majority didn't want to leave. In Northern Ireland, of course, this is a huge challenge for them. Does this make it more likely over time, in your view, that the United Kingdom ultimately disintegrates?
Well, I hope it doesn't, and I think it won't, but it obviously adds a dimension to the case of the people arguing for independence.
What's the biggest tension point that we need to watch going forward?
I think it's that if you're in Scotland and you really, you especially with a younger generation, you want to be part of Europe, and you see particularly a Conservative government that you haven't voted for, because Scotland's not voting Conservative, being anti-European, it's bound to fuel, and the nationalists are using this. Now, I think the reasons for Scotland remaining tied to the United Kingdom, economic reasons are massively powerful. And I think in the end, they'll outweigh anything else in the end. But it's given an extra dimension. I'm as worried, if not more worried, about Northern Ireland, because they're, again, a majority voted to stay in the European Union. Northern Ireland will, in effect, remain to some degree a part of that single market in Europe. And, for the first time very recently, the numbers of Catholics have outweighed the numbers of Protestants in Northern Ireland. Now, not everyone votes on that basis, but it's, there are tensions. So I think and hope the UK stays together, but there's no doubt Brexit has given an impetus to the people arguing for either United Ireland or Scottish independence.
Is there any recognition among the Brexiteers, given what has happened, the trajectory of the UK economy, the tensions, the fact that the US-UK trade deal for the time being is not in the cards, that actually they were selling a bill of goods? Do you get any of that?
Not a lot. I mean, it's... Look,
because you do have a new passport color, for example. I mean, I know that's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, no, look, we were told there'll be more money for the National Health Service. There's obviously not, because growth rates are down and therefore revenues are down. And we've spent, in any event, billions of pounds on new border checks and all the rest of it. We were told there would be an easy UK-US trade deal. Not merely is it not easy, it's not even under discussion. We were told that it was nonsense to suggest that Northern Ireland was going to become a problem, when it was obviously going to become a problem if we did Brexit in the way that was being described. But, if you read a lot of the right-wing commentary on Brexit, you'd think it was successful, and to the extent it wasn't, it's the unreasonableness of the Europeans. And the risk for the Conservative Party is they become, one of their former chairmen the other day described it as an English nationalist party now. So, but look, those of us who are passionately against Brexit, we've got to accept the argument. The argument's over, and what you're going to look at now is how you fix its problems and then move on. And there are some opportunities that can come for Britain being outside that regulatory framework. You can see how we could act in a more nimble way in, for example, financial services, life sciences, and so on. But this is the most important thing for British politics right now, is to realize we're living through a whole series of changes. I mean, you talked about these three crises, and they're changes that have got, whether it's climate, health, or artificial intelligence, these revolutions are changing our world in Britain as well as the world. And the whole question for government is not really an ideological question. It's how do you understand this world and harness its potential? And the sooner we get the political debate back to that, the better. So fix the Brexit problems and move on is what I would say.
Now, I've been startlingly narrow in my questions with you so far as someone who wasn't just prime minister for a decade, but also was truly a global figure and remain very involved in diplomacy around the world. So let me extend the aperture a little bit and talk first, of course, about what's happening with Russia. Boris Johnson continues to be seen as a very strong supporter of the Ukrainian president. The United Kingdom is seen by Biden as the second most important military supporter of the of the Ukrainians. We've just seen that Putin continues to escalate. How do you think the alliance is doing? How is Europe doing? How's the UK doing? And where do you think this goes?
Well, first of all, there'll be no change of UK policy under Liz Truss. That's clear. Right? The UK will remain absolutely firmly in support of Ukraine and the defense of its democracy. Secondly, I think the alliance has done well. I think the President of the United States has done well in bringing people together. I mean, a lot of people worry about whether Europe will hold its nerve through the winter and subsequently. At the moment, I would say it definitely will. I mean, you can never be sure about the politics of a whole set of different countries. And as we see from Italy, there's a certain amount of instability in the politics of Europe, of course, but I think Europe will hold together, and I think the alliance is strong. And remember, Ukraine for America is important, but it's quite a long way away from you. Right? Ukraine for Europe's on our doorstep, and for Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe has a powerful voice within the European Union today. They are absolutely in no doubt at all, unless this aggression is not merely stopped, but is seen definitively not to have worked and to have rebounded on the aggressor, then Europe itself will be at risk.
Turn to the Middle East briefly. Iran, of course, the nuclear deal, a lot of effort to bring it back into fruition. Right now does not look like it's happening, and we see big demonstrations on the ground, a number of deaths in Iran after this woman was killed by the religious police. Where do you think the United States, the Europeans, what is the correct approach? Should there still be a lot of effort to try to get this deal together, or are we past that time frame?
I mean, the original deal done by the Obama administration was a deal done with, I think, really good intentions and with a desire to make sure that you constrained the Iranians in their nuclear ambitions. The thing is, with the release of sanctions, it also gave them a lot of money to spend, and unfortunately they didn't spend it on the Iranian people. They spent it on exporting their destabilization tactics all around the Middle East. And look, my view of the Middle East, and I've spent a lot of time there since leaving office, is that there's really one big battle going on, and it's around modernization. It's around whether the societies of the Middle East can develop into societies of what I would call religious tolerance and rule-based economies. Doesn't mean to say they're all going to become democracies, but it means that they put religion in its rightful place, don't let it become a political ideology, and that they get rid of the sort of the web of corruption that often suppresses the proper enterprise and entrepreneurial spirit within the Middle East. That's the fight that's going on. And Iran is very clearly on the negative, reactionary and regressive side. And the problem is, all over the Middle East, their impact is destabilizing, whether it's in Iraq or Lebanon or Syria or virtually anywhere you look. And so for me, the important thing for the West to do is to support those modernizing forces. And I think this is what it's all about. So I don't know whether it's possible to get this deal back in a shape that is justifiable or not, but I do know that the Middle East will not be stable until the Iranian regime changes. I'm not suggesting we go and change it, by the way, but I'm just saying that is the single biggest destabilizing force in the Middle East.
I'm glad the caveat, because we've had bad experiences with regime change for democracy.
I know quite a lot about that.
Yeah. Final question. When you were prime minister, the world and governance and democracy looked very different, in many ways more stable than it does today. If you were prime minister today, if you were a leader on the global stage, a permanent member of the Security Council, a member of the G7, G20, what would you do differently as a consequence of that now than back in the days of cool Britannia?
So I would be doing two things, because I think for the West to be, for me, it's all about the West being strong, able to defend its values and its interests in an era where the geopolitics of the 21st century is going to change dramatically because of China. Right? So my view is, number one, the West has got to be a strong alliance, and if there is any benefit coming out of the ghastly events in Ukraine, it is that alliance has strengthened, and that means America and Europe and then our allies around the world, including in the Pacific, we stick together, we stay together, and we're more effective together, right? Because the second thing I would say is the biggest challenge to democracy is efficacy. When you follow a lot of the media debate, it's all about transparency or accountability. It's not, it's about effectiveness. And this is where I come to the second thing, which is, in my view, the big real world event is this technology revolution. And if you're looking at healthcare today or education today, or how people are going to work, how government functions, it's all about understanding that revolution. And its transformative potential. And what the West needs is not just a strong foreign policy, it needs a strong domestic mission, right? And that should be about this technology revolution and how you harness it. But to do that, the West's politics have got to return to a strong center, because that's what we had when I was in office. And the center, not as the split between left and right, which I think is a 20th century, left-right politics is so 20th century. Right? The real issues today are really practical, not ideological. But the center should be the place where you make the changes that match the scale of the challenge.
So I'm telling you, if you were campaigning, I kind of feel 21st century third way is what you're talking about.
Yeah, but this is correct in the end. I mean, what we, this is what I often say to people in the Labour Party when they say to me, Tony, we can't go back to 1997. And I say, no, we can't. But the trouble is you guys want to go backwards. You want to go pre-1997. I agree today. All the things we were talking about then have accelerated. They're not diminished or fallen away. I mean, when Bill Clinton and I were launching the initiative around the human genome, and I always remember him saying to me at the time, I think this is one of the most important things we'll ever do, which turned out to be true, not that I really understood it fully at the time. But you fast forward to today, it's even more important, right? So this is why I think that the problem is the populism in the West. It succeeds when the center can't solve the problems. And I always say to people, populism doesn't invent grievances. By and large, it doesn't invent them. It exploits them. So if you take immigration, for example, you've got to deal with immigration. If you don't have an immigration policy today, which provides controls over it, even if you're telling people immigrants do a great job in our economy, but you still need control. If you're not in that space, the populace is going to come along and exploit that issue. So it's all about, in my view, the retrieval of that strong, clear center. And, this is where politics has got to reach out beyond the ranks of professional politicians who spent their whole life doing nothing but politics, and understand the world, embrace it, and then change it.
Prime Minister Tony Blair, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
That's it for today's edition of the GZERO World Podcast. Like what you've heard? Come check us out at gzeromedia.com and sign up for our newsletter, Signal.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company, places clients' needs first by providing responsive, relevant, and customized solutions. Visit firstrepublic.com to learn more. In a world upended by disruptive international events, how can we rebuild? On Season 2 of Global Reboot, a foreign policy podcast in partnership with the Doha Forum, FP Editor-in-Chief Ravi Agrawal engages with world leaders and policy experts to look at old problems in new ways and identify solutions to our world's greatest challenges. Listen to Season 2 of Global Reboot wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to the GZERO World with Ian Bremmer podcast, your weekly geopolitical deep dive into the world's biggest news stories, featuring in-depth conversations with global leaders and newsmakers. To get more of GZERO's insights on global politics every morning, sign up for our free newsletter, GZERO Daily, at gzeromedia.com.